I didn't know. Are you ready? Your notes. I didn't know. I have a room rater of 10/10 pineapple because I got a a 10 on room rater. I didn't know this had another meaning, that people are advising us that if you have a pineapple, it's like having a bowl full of keys. I can't hear you, but I can see dominoes.
I don't have a pineapple. I just have a bowl full of keys. So I'm not sure what. Does this mean I have a pineapple? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't
Mine
know.
says room rater,
It's a whole different world you crazy people have.
Yeah,
hey, before I forget, let me thank Joey Kane for the very generous donation through, I believe it was through our PayPal link, $150 for the cause. For the effort, and we definitely appreciate that.
Joey does all those, did all the wiffle ball, all that stuff.
Yes, and I see him active in the chat, and I appreciate that. And so I think somewhere in our paperwork is all the different apps and things that we use, and we appreciate that, Joey. So yeah, and I just see a new one here. Oh, there, Jacqueline Mitchell, new member. Thank you so much. Yeah. And I've actually posted a couple of her astute comments. So welcome.
Yeah. And while you're talking about astute comments, all of you should hit the, my job is always to hit the like, subscribe, no matter. We're not going anywhere yet, but
hey, look there's an empty seat. Empty seat. That's the Paul O'Keefe seat. Look at this. And go to the top row there, and you see there's Ms. Rex. I don't know who that is sitting next to her. And then you see a man behind her. That's Tim, who I interviewed yesterday from outside the courthouse. He's with I can't remember. It's the Canton Daily News. Canton, it's a Canton media organization, and he's been, notice how they're letting him stand. Remember, there was that up and down thing. Nobody could stand anymore after they had the whole seating arrangement or rearrangement. But apparently now maybe you can stand again. Anyway, he was there either in that position or similar for all of trial number 1, and now he's back for trial number 2. And reserving some of his opinions as of yesterday about how they compare. So.
Speaking of comparisons, when I left at lunchtime, is quite apparent to me with all the tweeting at the Massachusetts State Police and all the complaints about Yuri Buchanan's how he testified this morning with his tood. Okay, that's a word. A slang word on the internet for attitude, okay, because he's really familiar with slang words now. He seemed to have a station house readjustment or adjustment, as we say in the biz this afternoon.
You think he had a talking to?
I think he had a talking to, and I don't think it was a talking to by Hank Brennan. I have to tell you, because I think Hank Brennan is one who set out the whole idea, because we've seen it with all the witnesses about, you don't give Jackson an inch, but you remain that calm and stalwart. But I think that he's going to listen to somebody higher up in his shall we say, the state police, and I think that he had a talking to, because you don't have that change in his, unless you've been spoken to.
It was more important for me to talk to the lawyers about scheduling, to give you some idea on how we're doing. I can tell you that everybody's in agreement that we are right on schedule. So we're not behind schedule. Optimistically, maybe we're still a little bit ahead, but we are on schedule for many purposes. Monday, I'm going to ask you all to come in at 10. So we'll start at 10 o'clock on Monday, and we will go a full day Monday. We'll leave every day next week, videos in a full day. So we will see you next week. Those same cautions. Please do not discuss this case with anyone. Don't do any independent research or investigation into this case. If you happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case, please disregard it and let us know. Be very careful with your social media use, and have a great weekend. See you Monday at 10. So I can leave that.
That suggests to me that they're going to have some law in motion Monday morning.
The Sally Port
to the jury.
The Sally Port issue. That. Come on, tell us what it is.
I mean, that's what we know. They didn't dabble in it today. In fact, kind of, I'm sure Alan Jackson's not happy they ended with a whimper today rather than some sort of big, moment. But it got kind of derailed with the most recent sidebar. So, yeah, I mean, that's the only big chunk that is left that is certainly going to be an issue. And this is the first time properly, I think, that the judge said, you guys come in at 10. We'll get started at 10, because she's told them.
All
Okay.
right, so Monday we'll start with the jury at 10. If you need me before 10, please let people know so that we can deal with anything we can beforehand. I should be here, I'll be here before 10. So, all right, we'll see you on Monday. Thank you.
So it's not planned. Interestingly, it's not
planned,
planned.
yeah.
It's just let's have a delayed start. Maybe because she thinks I think every case but one day they did not have a sidebar before the jury was able to get to their places in the courtroom. So I don't know. Maybe she's planning ahead. Thinks there's going to be a big fight about something, and maybe that was this recent sidebar led her to believe that's a possibility. So anyway, I think that's the smart thing. You're always going to have issues. Why not just let the jury sleep in, or grab a bagel or whatever they need to do, and get there refreshed at 10, and then go to work rather than get there at 9 and then twiddle their thumbs while they're doing very important work in the courthouse. Anyway, so I got a couple of big moments. Oh, this is our recap show and our end
Right,
show.
right. And Monday's going to be
Monday's
going to be epic, and I won't be on with you, but it's going to be epic Monday with this whole fight with the Sally.
It's going to be interesting. Yeah. So let's tease Monday at this point. You're on assignment, so we're going to have. I'm working out the details here, but have a special guest, a special Cantonite guest. In the 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock range for whatever the lunch break is, and then Offie Patterson will be joining at 6 o'clock to do our recap show. So Offie Patterson, Los Angeles defense attorney, we've had her on before. She was one of my favorites at Law & Crime to have on. She's got some unspoken riz, I think. She comes across as a little.
Bob Bianchi's going to be upset with that. Somebody else is stealing his riz.
Did he trademark that? I'm not sure. Anyway, so that'll be Monday night while you're doing your own assignment, and then we'll roll into the rest of the week. What do you think? I guess it depends on if the Sallyport video becomes a major bone of contention, and then the question becomes, is it going to come in and be explored or not? Totally affects the total presentation time for not just this witness, but for the prosecution.
Well, I think obviously they're planning all day on Yuri. If not, they're going to bring in. I think the next witness they have to do something with regard to the neurosurgeon in Florida, and then are they going to end on the children, John O'Keefe's children, because we had the order that was.
They did already. Yeah, that gives us a heads up that it should be coming, and that's going to be a rock kicking day, as we say in the business, because they're not allowing even audio.
Right.
So it's going to be shut off. The switch will be clicked off. So I can't imagine the testimony is very long. It's probably going to focus around that morning of the 29th, the phone calls made from, of course, we're not supposed to know the kids' names but we know who they are. The phone call that was made that initiated the contact between Jennifer McCabe and Karen Reed, or vice versa, technically, through one of the kids. So, so that'll be dark. I don't know. I don't think I'm ending on that. If I'm the prosecution, those certainly aren't going to be my final witnesses, right?
Oh, who's going to be who was the final witnesses last time? I don't remember. Does anyone in our chat remember who the final witnesses are last time? Where you're looking at. So we'll see about that. But woo, that's all I can say. So an interesting bit of testimony we hadn't heard. Chloe is now Cora.
That is, and that incenses me. I don't get, I'm annoyed a lot and disappointed a lot, but the poor dog. That's just mean to give a dog that's 7 years old. Does that sound right? A new name. Don't dogs have enough problems? Now you're going to give the dog a new name that it has to learn and respond to. Why would you do that? Why can't the dog just be Chloe with another family?
Jackson's suggesting is implanting the seed that they don't really have any evidence that Chloe is now Cora, that they've got unsigned vet reports, there's no DNA. He's kind of planting the seed that Chloe was rehomed, but maybe.
Well, we know it's rehomed. That was acknowledged. Buchanan said, rehomed. They started dancing around what word to use. Dumped, gotten rid of, whatever you want to call it. That's not a dispute. The new name, though, I think it I don't know who it makes look worse, the new family or the old family. But I just don't get
I
it.
don't know. I think
Why
now
would you do that?
maybe in this, it's not in dispute that the Alberts don't have under the basis of supposedly rehomed, but the question is, what does rehomed mean? All right, because Jackson's raising the possibility that they don't have the right dog, in case they want to go into that bite mark issue later on. He's raising the possibility. Dogs are microchipped. Tubi's microchipped. All of my dogs for decades have been microchipped. It's very easy when a dog is microchipped to tell the registered who's the right dog. But apparently, I'm gathering. Because we would have heard that the dog wasn't microchipped. So is Cora really Chloe?
Ooh, interesting. And probably a distinction without a difference, but it also brings up, it calls into question this whole, I didn't know anyway, that Buchanan was the one who went to Vermont to find Cora and was there at the time of the mold impressions that were done. So he's probably the best witness to testify about the rehoming, at least where and when, and right.
Yeah, but they didn't get and no one got the dog from the Alberts. It was like
and there was no transfer record,
else, right? And then to
whatever that is,
and then to somebody named Riley, to a vet, and to somebody named Riley.
That was the third party. What is this? Is this some dog? Underground Railroad kind of system? They take the dog, they disappear the dog, and then a third party is the mule that moves the dog to a new family. I've never heard of such a thing. You're just getting rid of the dog because it has been violent, isn't working with your family, was involved in a crime, whatever the reason. You're just getting rid of the dog. I didn't realize it was so complicated. You got to bring a third party in, and then they're putting the dog in the dog witness protection program. They're changing the name, changing the location to give the dog a new job. It just seems way too much, unless there's a lot to hide. I don't understand this.
Very interesting. So I was listening while you were on today. You have a lot to talk about. There was a lot happening, including the fact that it's clear that Buchanan did honor the sequestration order. That's the one thing he did honor, because maybe
sounds like it.
Because what he said the testimony of the two witnesses would be is different, because they didn't pull up simultaneously. There was a gap. Remember?
And
there was a gap.
And remember that Ricky was not even. He hasn't been a witness. He was identified as the driver with Miss Maxon, but he didn't testify.
Right.
All of that about who was jockeying. I should have done a little video of that when I was there this week, because it's very easy to see how that vehicle interaction took place if you're on that Cedar Crest Road that Fairview dead ends into, because you just give way and one car follows the other 2 houses to the location. And so
but maybe there was a delay. Maybe he let him go, and then there was a delay.
I guess.
She goes up, she stops. Yeah, enough of a delay that John O'Keefe could get out. John O'Keefe can come out of the car and go into the house, because he wasn't in the car and he wasn't on the lawn. So
that would be odd. It would just be odd in terms of the normal process of basically flashing your lights and waving a car through, which is what allegedly Ricky did, so that Karen Reed, who had missed the street, had to do her 3-point turn and come back, and then for her it's a right, for him it's a left onto Fairview. But to let her go and then just sit there just doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah. So.
Thank you, Blessed in Texas. Yes, the rant artwork. Missy worked so hard on that. She had like 7 different things, and I'm glad you all voted. And I didn't tell you which one I liked. I liked the one you all picked. That was my favorite, So thank you for noticing it. Missy and all of our mods and everybody here who help us. We can't thank them enough.
Yeah, speaking of that, we have, a couple of the microdot productions, I will call them. I mentioned that we would try and use because it displays the Waterfall bar interactions. I've just talked about how I'm not as hopped up on how important that stuff is as others have become. That it's some sort of, now we're play fighting because this is what we're going to do to John O'Keefe, and then we're waving to have him make sure you come with us, make sure you come. We're going over to 34 Fairview, and then there's the text at 20 after that's been stipulated to, in which there's a question sent to John O'Keefe. Are you coming? Are you here? I don't make as much out of that as a lot of people seem to. So we're going to get into that with the microdots enhanced versions. And I've said, disagree if you'd like, but we're not saying we promote whatever they're promoting in these videos, because they're very much the pro Karen Reed contingent. We're just taking advantage of, and they've been very nice to let us use these. The fact that it pushes in at the right spots, slows down, and gives us a much better view of the interaction than even we saw in court. I mean,
Right.
they tried in
And
court.
Richie's been very nice to let us have access to them, use them.
Yes.
And he was apparently a friend of John O'Keefe's from what I've read. So, it sounds like he wants truth and justice too. But, Michael, I didn't understand the importance the first time, because the first time we didn't have the whole text history of Higgins and Reed read. Remember, Lowley read some of them, and the defense didn't put them all in, and I guess they decided that was a mistake. But when we look at the whole text, and I think I sent you the chronology that was posted, that Karen went over to Higgins' place on the 19th, and then after that, she ghosted him, stopped responding.
Yeah, it sounds like there might have been an intimate moment, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe somebody was less satisfied than the other, and it sounded like Higgins continued pursuit or didn't cut her off anyway, and she ghosted him.
Yeah, she ghosted him. Right.
So let's assume that's the setup. Let's assume.
Okay. Okay. So then on the 28th, that's the night. The next morning is when something happens to John O'Keefe. On the 28th, Higgins is in the Waterfall. Karen and John are there. There's no interaction, and Higgins.
And he sends a text like, "What does he say? What's up?" or something.
Well. Okay. And then
this is
responded to
5 days after the ghosting.
This is 5 days after the
23rd was the ghosting. So it's 5 days later. Okay, so he's been stewing. He's been stewing now for 5 days.
Right.
What's wrong? Was I inadequate? Was it not good for you? Whatever it was. And now he's now in physical space with her, and he's like, what the hell?
Yeah.
What's the deal?
Well, what's the deal? And then on the 29th, that's when you had the 12:20 text that Higgins texted John O'Keefe, you coming here? Okay, that's right after Karen just doesn't respond to his text and after the ghosting. And then they arrive at 12:21 at 34 Fairview. And then they never hear from, she never sees John after she leaves him again there. So, I mean, when you put it, I didn't think much of it until it was put in context of all of the text. And then all of a sudden I was like, well, maybe they've got something here given everything else that's going on.
It's possible. And maybe, Higgins is a hothead. And we know Colin Albert, who is not part of the third-party culpability. He's been nicely removed from his perspective.
Right.
Maybe a couple of hotheads get into it. And you know what? I don't care if they have to prove that or not. It's the defense. That's the defense case.
Defense, right.
They don't have to prove a damn thing. So they plant these seeds of concern, curiosity. It just doesn't get the prosecution anywhere. And this happened in the first case. We know the jury started focusing on this whole conspiracy and effectively put the burden on the defense to prove it and walked away unsatisfied that conspiracy was proven.
Yeah, obviously the defense is going to have to ask for a specific jury charge. The defense presented the defense, they don't need that to prove it. It's only the question is whether it beats into the reasonable doubt. And they're going to have to push for a specific jury charge on this defense.
I'm very curious about in Massachusetts. We don't do that in Massachusetts. Very curious if they allow a special instruction, which has to be crafted and approved by both sides and supported in case law. If they do or don't, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen there. But it does. I mean, there is far more evidence of a potential conspiracy, conflict, plan than there is of the actual prosecution case. There's far more evidence that there was something going on. It's not to a conclusion, but there's far less to prove the prosecution's case. That's weird.
Right, that's weird. And then the jury again. The case is a little disjointed because the prosecution, we're almost at the end of the case when they're going to try to prove a cause of death and therefore a manner of death that they can argue through a brain surgeon in Florida. Okay. Who presents a case like that? Okay. Yeah. No one. And the jury is probably a little bit confused as to that part of it.
Or they're just expecting it to come along. They're expecting, well, I'm sure the prosecution is going to put Mr. Proctor on because obviously somehow Mr. Buchanan were working in lockstep on this case. So certainly he's going to testify with the prosecution, right? Certainly the ME is going to come in and tell us exactly what happened. They heard a shred of the whole undetermined part of the conversation when Buchanan first got on the stand, and we talked to your husband, who was gracious enough with a few minutes to tell us how the Emmy is supposed to work with law enforcement and share and trade ideas. They're all looking for the same answer. What the hell happened? And is there criminal culpability here? So they know there was something going on with the Emmy, but they would assume, well, that person's coming on. Of course. That's
what I think. Of course, they've seen law and crime. They assume that's coming on. And the other thing is by forcing Judge Cannone to have all that whole text stream admitted with Brian Higgins. Remember, the prosecution wasn't going to call Brian Higgins now. Okay, but now they've learned, whether it was objected to or not, they learned that there wasn't an extraction done by his cell phone, right? So now does the prosecution have to call him? They look like they're hiding him.
Yeah, and there wasn't an extraction of Brian Alberts either. It just seems so selective that if I'm on the jury, I'm just wondering, okay, well, got to get the rest of this info somewhere. And if they don't, then I'm going into deliberation saying, how do we get from point A to point B? We're missing all these bits and pieces. One of the mic drop moments, at least for me, in this second half of the afternoon was, let me find it here. This was when you're talking about the things that were found and not found and the order in which they were found. And of course, we're talking about the taillight pieces, right? I had to rehome them. They were in my big evidence bag, but I poured them out of my big evidence bag, and they're now back in my clear bag. And this, seems to be the way they collected them in this case. They just put a bunch of them in one bag. Crazy. But here they are. Not one of them was found before. Let me double check my notes here, because this to me was key. I triple starred it for some point. Where is it there? Where are you? I'm getting the exact timeline down here. It was not one piece was found until after the SUV was in the Canton Police Department. Not one piece of taillight was found before the SUV was in the Canton PD Sallyport. Wow. To me, that's a pretty significant fact that has now been acknowledged by the supervisor of the lead investigator. Not explained, but a clear fact.
Right.
And Alan Jackson did a good job, too, of repeating the search areas and comparing that with these big chunks that were found, days and or weeks later.
Right.
That whole argument to me with that crescendo that none of these pieces, none of them were found until that car was in the Sallyport. That's powerful.
Right. Show us what the light looks like. Well,
the other light, what's left of the light?
Right. This is our light. That's our light.
Yeah. And so there has been some question and concern, and I'm not up enough on the tech, to be honest with you. You have the plastic part of the polycarbonate lens, right? That's what ends up shattering and being sprinkled about. But inside you have the light emitting diodes, and they look white, right? That looks like a white piece of plastic, and the bulbs are inside there. They can be red, they can be white, they could be any particular color. So I think that causes to some confusion when we're seeing these less than perfect pictures of the taillight, and they're being, blown up and manipulated. It's hard to tell if there's a glow. Is that a glow because it's a white light coming from behind a red lens? Or is that a red light inside a broken lens? You see what I'm saying? And I don't think any of the video is clear enough to answer that question. The one that we just looked at, where Buchanan was hesitant to suggest that the car is connected. Well, I do see the tire seems to have moved, but I'm not sure. I can't tell where or if they hit, but all right, okay, I guess they did. Then the car starts to drive away.
But did you hear the dig that Alan Jackson in the first trial? You wouldn't even admit that the car is even touched, and there was an objection, but the jury heard it, right? The jury heard it,
and they did such a great job of the picture-in-picture. It's perfect. You see as the car gets nearest the traverse, they have the tight shot of the wheel. Well, clearly that didn't just happen. It wasn't a little minor earthquake. At the exact same time that this SUV, Karen Reed is driving, is nearest the traverse. Obviously, it bumped it. Okay, because as I've described it, that ridiculous tight space they have in that driveway where it goes in and makes a hard 90. You know, if you look at that video where she's backing up parallel with the street. So she has to do 90 degrees to go down that driveway. And they've got a car parked there. Probably not the smartest place to park a car, but they're, probably used to jostling. And, in that particular moment at 5:07, she's freaking out because, either she knows that she's left him in the snow dead, if you believe the prosecution, or she has no clue where he is. Either way, she's a little more hectic in her driving. She bumps into it. Buchanan is hesitant to even suggest that there is that bump, but ultimately does. Then they show the car driving down the driveway, so that right rear light is closest to the ring camera footage, right? But it's snowing, it's fuzzy, and I don't know if it's showing raw tail light with red lights underneath, or if it's showing red lens over the light.
Or showing
I
the
can't tell.
glare from the house, especially on the ring cameras. Because
If they have
I have cameras.
Are there floodlights
all the way,
out there? Are there floodlights?
I don't know, but I have cameras over here, and the ring cameras usually will just kind of go on when they see something, right? And
right,
so you have the light, and that
yeah.
right, and so that light goes right down. If that light is a glare from hitting that tail, just the ring camera light.
Okay, that's something I've not heard anybody talk about, because it could also be, these cameras have light dark sensitivity, and so at night there's the night view, which looks even fuzzier and it's kind of grayish, and there's no external light to like say, oh, it's dark, here's a light and now I'm recording. It just records in night view, so it's not in color, it's black and white, and it's a little fuzzier. It looked to me like, it's 5:07 in the morning, it's the dead middle of winter, sun ain't coming up for a couple of hours, probably quite much closer to 7 a.m., which means any light there is either from an external light, like you suggest, or it's just whatever the ambient light is from street lights or whatever. I've not heard that really explained very well. All I know is I can't tell from that video what the condition of that light is and what's making it the tail light.
But you can tell that the car's hit. You can tell. Oh,
that's to me, that's nothing. It's the contact took place. Right. Now the question becomes, what's the damage caused? Right. Was it broken in pieces? Was it cracked? I mean, that's what's important. The contact took place. That's just undisputed.
It certainly wasn't. There wasn't 7-inch pieces out of 2 7-inch pieces by 3.5, 4 inches out of that light, because that would mean there'd have to be 7 inch.
Yeah, I mean, this is
7 by, and then there'd be another piece like that. There'd be another piece like that out of that light, and that clearly was not there. There's no way. And I think Alan Jackson is going to do that this time. Right there, they are, because he spent a lot of time on those, and that there's clearly not that. There's clearly not that, at least in my opinion.
Well, the question is, there were apparently no pieces were found at One Meadows, right? There was nothing in the driveway there, right? Right. So all of this talk we've heard from various witnesses, from cracked to broken in pieces, sometimes by the same witness at different times, Jim McCabe, it really becomes a question of, when did those breaks take place? Was it before it was at the Sally Port or after? That's really the dividing line. Did they happen before the Sally Port or after? And since none of them were found until after the Sally Port, it just makes you wonder, could it have been afterwards? And maybe by some human with a hammer or some other gadget.
Okay. So do you want to look at Waterfall? Because
let's do that. I was going to try and do them, but Missy's in charge of those. So Missy, the first one is, as I recall, let me check the rundown here. The first one was the texting, I think, where there allegedly was that text that we've talked about, where he said, what did he say again? He says, what does he say? You just said it a minute ago.
Hold on a second. I will bring it back up. Okay. I have it right here. At 128.22, or you're talking about the 129.22?
The one where Higgins is saying to Karen Reed, what's up?
He says, I'm well. 128.22. Well. Okay.
Question mark.
Right. On the basis because she had stopped ghosting him on the 23rd. Okay.
So that's this video. Okay.
It's 11:30. at the Waterfall bar. The man at the center of your screen is one Brian Higgins. The surveillance camera detects the infrared light emitted by his iPhone's True Depth camera, which is used for Face ID. This is Officer John O'Keefe. He would be nearly dead in under an hour, sustaining fatal injuries that the most credentialed experts determined were not from a vehicle. Across the table is Karen Reed. She is the girlfriend of John O'Keefe, and also the woman that Brian Higgins has been obsessed with for weeks up until this point. However, she's been ignoring him, and he wants to know where they stand. Both Brian Higgins and Brian Albert have been drinking all day long. Higgins keeps looking at Karen Reed, and at 11:32 he can't take it anymore. He gives in to temptation. He removes his phone from his pocket and sends her a text message. In his whiskey-fueled, intoxicated state, he types out, well, and presses send. It doesn't matter that John O'Keefe is standing right there, a few feet away from him. Higgins is determined to get some kind of reaction from the woman he desires, whatever the consequences may be. From this point forward, Higgins can be seen frequently checking his phone, presumably awaiting Karen's response. But that response would never come, surely adding to his humiliation and anger. You all remember this short video we released last week showing Chris forcibly grabbing Higgins by the arm. I've played it over and over and over again, trying to determine what exactly is happening. One thing is clear. These three men have prior knowledge of something related to John O'Keefe's future. I wanted to see John's reaction to the Bryans taunting more clearly. He comments, then gestures, referring to the exchange. In 3, 2, 1. And then is called by the bartender to sign the check. But if Chris and the Bryans had prior knowledge, when did they discuss it? To try to find the answer to that question, I went back to look again. And 10 minutes earlier, this happened. The three men's body language changes. They speak closely and glance towards John and Karen, smirking. Then moving closer, discussing something privately.
All right. So, thank you, Missy. So it was all kind of in that one Microdots production, both the interaction between the boys and then whatever was going on with the texting. So I don't know. The texting I think is interesting. I think that is more helpful for the narrative that the defense suggests, which is that Higgins is just pissed off because for whatever reason she's said I'm no longer interested without saying anything. She's ghosted him. Whether they had some intimate interaction that led up to that, don't know for sure. But anyway, so she's no longer pursuing and or even receptive. So okay, so I could see that because guys are guys. That whole jostling, and I've called it the grabicus assicus in the Latin, that was taking place in the bar with the three guys. I don't make that much of that. I don't know that that's suggest. Hey, we're gonna mix it up with this guy when we get the chance. I just don't. So, but people do. What do you think?
Yeah, well, you know what? When Yuri Buchanan's asked about it, and he says it looks like he's being given the Heimlich maneuver, I make more of it, because why say something as silly as that? Because you know that's not the truth, right? So I don't
Yeah.
know. It starts raising my hackles. But again, well, I'm coming now having known nothing about the case coming into the first trial, but the second trial, it just seems that the prosecution trying to hide everything. So I'm looking at it at a different lens. I'm not sure the jury's looking at it with that lens.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, it does create questions. It makes me wonder what is going on. Does it get me into? I'm sure there's a conspiracy. I'm sure they plan to attack John O'Keefe, and that's what happened when they went to 34 Fairview. Again, defense doesn't have to prove that.
Or you know, or John O'Keefe and Higgins got into it, maybe with the help of whatever. Things happened, got out of control, and O'Keefe died in a fight. That's
Yeah.
you know, whether it be
Possible.
accidental.
It's
Absolutely.
possible.
Right.
And here we are, as is the prosecution's case, spending more time defending that story or pursuing it, depending on which side you're on, the defense or the prosecution, than the crime allegedly charged. You know, there's no crime charged against Brian Albert or Brian Higgins for fighting with John O'Keefe. There's no charge for that.
Right. Right. That's true.
So we're spending 80% of our time talking about the defense case.
Except the prosecution also here is going to hear. I mean, the jury will hear that those two, Brian Albert and Higgins, got rid of their phone. I mean, because that's the issue. But you know, we're told as defense attorneys, if you get that jury in there discussing all these little things about what if this happened, what if that happened, what if that happened, then you win, because that means that you can't prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's your goal as a defense attorney.
Of course, and the key to that is make sure they transition from what about this, what about that? Defense hasn't proven it, but they've sure given us things to talk about. Transition into, but has the prosecution proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt? Because they go down that other track, as we saw from the first jury.
Right.
Some folks did, and some folks were saying, "Hey, the defense hasn't proven to me that there was a conspiracy." Well, you know, it's good news and bad news. You've won in getting them to focus on that, but you lose because it took them off the burden of proof the prosecution has.
And that's why you're always looking for that one juror, as I keep saying, and we do that when we do focus groups. Who's the ideal juror that at that point will stand up and say, "Look, everybody, we're not here to determine what happened. We're here to determine whether the prosecution proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt." So you need to find that one juror. That's the juror you're looking for.
You have any other notes from the afternoon session, Professor?
Let's see. The station had adjustment, Yuri's attitude. I can't wait to find out who did that. Chloe and Cora, we talked about. My
Chloe.
pineapple.
I will not call that dog Cora. I will not. I refuse.
You know,
that is Chloe.
You know, the fact that Yuri finally admitted that the cars did impact, and I thought it was actually kind of classy of Jackson, because he started out with the questioning about in a previous testimony, you wouldn't even admit they impacted, and there was an objection sustained, blah blah blah, and then he got around to I think that by then Yuri Buchanan was so, shall we say, softened up from the punches, right? You know, he'd been rope the dope so much that he finally admitted, yes, the cars did impact. And so Jackson didn't go back to that to then say, you know, okay, you didn't admit that before, right? He didn't go back there. I think he thought maybe that was too much, looked like too much beating up on him at that point.
Could be. And then I think they had a sidebar at her about that time and kind of changed tacks when he came back and got into Chloe. Here was something I think he did effectively, that kind of synthesized for this jury this interesting way they investigated this case and how things played out over such a long period of time. He says, you know, there were 20 police reports that were not filed until more than 100 days after the incident. There were 3 reports filed that were not filed until more than 300 days beyond the incident. There were 3 reports filed more than 400 days beyond the incident. There were 3 reports filed more than 500 days, and the report that was filed the longest after the incident was 581 days after the incident. Now, I guess, you know, for the jury, they got to make something of that in their minds. Like, how is that normal procedure? You know, whatever happened to, you know, doing something that is at or about the time of whatever the event is you're investigating. That just sounds like just as finding pieces of the taillight sprinkled in here, there, and again over weeks. Why are there reports that are being generated so much later than the date of the incident. I could see, I'd even give him a year. I'll give him a year. Just that's about as liberal as I can get. Something new turns up. But remember, those are cases where they haven't targeted anybody. There are a lot of cases that are unsolved or that are cold cases. Why?
Right.
Because it's taken forever and they don't have anybody. This is a case in which, if you believe some of the details we've learned, within about 15 hours, they already had this thing locked up. It was done.
Right,
It was a done deal.
Right.
So why do you need
Yeah.
all these reports that stretch out as far as 581 days?
Yeah, so they may not know the importance of that. See, I think all
No.
that also was the basis. I have a feeling that Alan Jackson is going to go back with Leslie and asked for the judge to reconsider the usage of Michael Easter, their expert, given all the problems that have arisen and all the admissions that have now been made about reports when evidence was found. I think if I had my druthers and I was a poker playing woman, I would, if I ever get to the casino to play poker for like real money one of these years, okay, I think they're going to file that motion for reconsideration.
And all I can say on that is that we will have Michael Easter on here after this trial is over. That's all I can say. And so that'll be very interesting, whether he testifies or not.
Right.
Let's see. I think that was all of my my notes, I think.
Any of you have any questions for us before we go? Yes. Right. Oh, this is good. Jenna G makes a point. After they already know the FBI was investigating is when they started to go back. That's an interesting point, that they could have gone back after that. Very interesting, But the problem is the jury will never know about the FBI. I think I'll say it again.
Yeah,
it's wrong for Judge Cannoni to have excluded who these people were hired by, because who these people were hired by and the credibility of their opinions carries weight by who they were hired by. And it's wrong for the jury to not know the whole story.
It reinforces the independence, which is, of course, what the defense wants.
Right.
I've always described these experts. It's gotten a little muddier, but it's manna from heaven, because you find these independent experts that side with your defense position. Now, of course, they were retained, and we know how back and forth has gone cuckoo. We don't know if on May 7th any reports produced by ARCA were turned over, but the fact that it's now the 9th and we haven't heard any motions from the Commonwealth to exclude, then I have to assume they were turned over on time. And that was the 7th.
You would have heard.
We probably would have heard about it.
You know what? And you never know whether Brennan's going to open that door, in his questioning, or one of the answers that somebody gives going to open that door. I mean, it was very clear when Chloe was brought into the mix on Buchanan that had not been discussed in his preparation, right, today. Because you just saw,
see that little smile? Do you see that little smile?
There was a smile, right, and a freeze ray. There's a little smile.
We're going there. That's where we're going. All right.
Yeah. I see the report, and he wanted to see the report, the vet report. He's the one who wanted the report on getting the vet report, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I just didn't know he was so hands-on with Chloe when that whole thing went down. I don't know exactly when it was, but whenever it was, he was there. I found that interesting. Another note I made, and this related to the finding of the taillight pieces after the car went to the Sally Port. I was thinking of this in the context of not having Proctor testify, right? For whatever reason, never testifies. I don't even know if you need him if you have that kind of evidence for this jury that these things that were so important that directly relate to the prosecution's belief that this vehicle struck John O'Keefe, and that resulted in his death. None of the pieces that prove that contact were ever discovered at the scene until after the car was at the Sally Port. I think you've gone 80% of the way without Proctor.
Yeah, and then let the jury wonder. I don't know, because they heard an opening that he was fired.
So that's a different story. Right. I'm just looking at the raw evidence as it's been presented through Buchanan. How close does that get the defense to their defense? That this was a sabotage from the start, and Proctor was the main guy. Yeah. I would be sorely disappointed if Proctor did not testify.
I hope I'm not going to be. Would it be perfect if Proctor testifies like next Friday or something when you're gone? On Monday they're going to finish Yuri. Mary asked, so do you think the Commonwealth would talk about the FBI if it was good for them? Sure, they would. They'd be telling that judge, independent. We want.
Of course. If they would be using it to buttress their opinions, if they were
Right.
opinions that were appropriate for the Commonwealth. They said, look at this federal investigation confirms what we're telling you, jury members.
Oh my
Yeah.
God, absolutely. That's why I think it's so wrong. And Scott McGinnis, yes, we just discussed that, Scott, that what you're looking for is that one juror to say, hey, it's not the defense burden of proof to prove their conspiracy, it's the prosecution's burden to prove their case. And you have to consider all the defense has put forward to you because they don't have an affirmative burden of proof. This is not an affirmative defense case. People have to, affirmative defense is something like insanity, right?
Self-defense.
Self-defense, right. So.
Yeah, so this is not. This is a, make them prove their case, Mr. Prosecutor. And by the way, here are some of the things that suggest to this jury why you shouldn't believe their case.
Right.
Right.
Scott, Missy's going to be in touch with you because we're going to ask a big thing of you to fill Michael Bryan's shoes next Friday.
Oh yeah, has he been contacted yet?
I don't know, but I'm probably telling him the first time. Whether
he's going, whoa!
Co-host with me from 11 till
there you go.
2, and then if we did a recap show from that night from 6 to 7. Okay, so just so you know, it's coming. It's coming, Scott. So Scott's going to run out.
Bring your flag. Yeah. You can't go out of town next Friday. You're done.
He's getting the news right on the air, fresh on the air. Okay. Anyhow, we should probably. Any other notes for us, Michael?
I'm taking one last look here, Professor, just to see if I've got these.
I've been called a lot of things, but professor is not one of them.
Yeah, you're a professor though, and I did some adjunct professoring myself for moot court.
Adjunct faculty, right? You're right.
Yeah, so you're adjunct professor, which will then from there you go to associate professor, and then you're going to become a full professor. Let's see. That was good. That was interesting. Yeah, I think I've got most everything. I did find it interesting how Buchanan was hesitant. Remember, we haven't heard a lot about the injuries, strangely enough. Day 13, and it's like, well, we know there was some arm injuries. We know there was maybe he got
cut over the eye.
Some black eyes. He was hesitant to even verify that. And when there was some report indicating eyelids were swollen, he said, well, not above the eye. It was the eyelids. They said one said there was an egg above his, like an egg welt above his right eye. And then he's exaggerating.
Dr. Buchanan.
Buchanan, yeah, he's
Dr. Buchanan.
Dr. Buchanan. Yeah, he was not happy with those descriptions, and he said there was a tiny laceration near one eye.
As I said, clearly there was a station house adjustment for his testimony in the afternoon. But this whole evasiveness and this whole I don't understand what you're saying. I mean, he understood. He understood SUP. He understood all these slang words. He was assigned to the presidential detail for the helicopter, right? When he was in the United States military. He was the highest assignment. He talked on his direct how he had top secret clearance and all that kind of stuff. You want to tell me the jury is going to believe the guy who was assigned for 6 years in the military and was assigned to the presidential detail for what, 2 or 3 years to guard the president of the United States when he was in the military, that he somehow didn't understand all this? Oh, give me a break.
Yeah, they had no theories in that whole operation. There were never any theories. That's a whole new thing. Right. Theory. Can you use it in a sentence?
But he knew what ghosting was. He knew what ghosting was on the internet. And there was a WW word. I'm not even going to use it there, because that kind of went past. But he clearly knew what that was too, in the text messages. I mean, the one thing we can all agree on is that Higgins. Let me put it this way: he's not going to be on Bachelor. The Bachelor.
No, you don't. You don't think he's got some appeal? Yeah.
No unspoken ruse, that's for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with that having been said, with that malignment of his person, okay. It's been a crazy week.
Based on his text.
Oh, based only on his text, of course. I'm sure he's and the fact that he decides to break up his SIM card and throw his phone in the trash and federal property.
Okay, we have one more. Madeira Beach caregiver. Why was it? Thank you again, Madeira Beach. Why was it never asked? How did Brian Albert look when you saw him at the interview? Bruises, etc. Did I miss something? Michael.
Why was it never asked?
When she saw Albert accompanying, when he saw Albert accompanying Jennifer McCabe, right, to the interview. But I don't think necessarily it was it his interview? I guess it was his interview. Or was it Proctor's interview?
Yeah, I'm not sure which interview it was that they were in the same room. But I don't remember anybody ever talking about injuries to those that might have been involved, other than Colin and the bruised knuckles, which we'll see if that even becomes an issue because he can't be talked about as the third-party culprit. So
that's right.
How does that?
Judge.
I'm not sure how that comes up if he's on the stand, and I'm sure he will be on the stand. So I'm sorry, I'm a little confused on which meeting it might have been and whether or not there were bruises ever brought up during any of those interviews or any injuries to anybody else that was allegedly part of some sort of altercation.
Yep. Okay, partner.
All right, then. Just another week in the Karen Reed case.
My life is passing by the Karen Reed case. We're almost at the end of May, and we're still talking Karen Reed.
Yeah, well, it's been 3 weeks, and I'm guessing we're going to fly through. I would say the end of June will kind of be in the ballpark for wrapping this up. That's my guess.
And then there's going to be motions, and if she gets convicted anyway, the motions that are coming. These attorneys may just have to take residence and vote from the Sacco and Vanzetti courtroom.
Yep. Well, I know that when we do get to verdict watch, we'll definitely be up there for the duration on that. However that plays out, who knows? This could be an OJ. 4.5 hours after 9 months. I mean, who knows?
Yep.
We just don't know.
Yeah.
We know, and we know this is coming, and I can't wait to see how it's handled. And that is the ridiculous verdict slip / instruction issue on did you come to a unanimous decision on any of the counts? Any of the counts.
If the jury sends out a hung note.
Yes,
right.
And there's going to be that discussion about a special instruction, which I fully expect will be refused. We'll see. I mean, because you could be heading right into the same conclusion we saw in trial number 1. And I don't know why anybody would want that.
Well, I'm sure Karen Reed would want it if it means that it should be convicted.
Well, rather than being convicted, yes.
That's why they didn't ask the question in the first place, because you don't know what you're scared of what the answer is.
Yes, and we batted that about the first time. It's like, be careful what you ask for, because if you're in the defense table and you say, well, let's have an answer to any of them. Oh, well, on second charge, we found her guilty. Yeah, fine. Well, no, wait a minute. Never mind.
Back.
Rewind that. Take that back. That's a dangerous place to be.
Okay, so let me ask you 2 questions, all right? Who had the better day and who had the better week?
You mean, are you just talking broadly prosecution versus defense?
Prosecution versus defense.
Yeah, I think defense certainly had the better week, and there were many high points, not just Buchanan's freshest in mind, of course, but did Jen McCabe finish last week? I'm so tied up in the time frame. Or did she finish Monday? I think I can't remember. I'd have to go to my list. I think on balance, just broad brush. Yeah, defense definitely.
It doesn't matter when she testified, quite frankly, because
yes. But by week to week, defense definitely had a better week. And again, as I said before,
day and a better day. Who had a better day today?
Definitely had a better day. Although I did appreciate Buchanan's recitation of the text. I thought that was fine. I had no problem with that. But as I've said, when you're spending 80% of your time talking about the defense case, it ain't a good time for the prosecution. Sorry, it can't be.
Yeah. On the prosecution case, you're spending 80% of your time.
Yes.
Because the prosecution case doesn't get any better.
This is their case in chief.
Sometimes
it's hard to tell, but yeah, this is their case in chief.